Gentle ponies, welcome back to Salty's Tutorial Corner, where I, your host, Ashel Salt, will show you how to render Princess Luna's eyes in Inkscape. Her eyes are quite different from the other ponies because she has kind of this sharp, pointy oval shape, so unfortunately we can't use my usual trick of using the standard ellipse by 5 points extension. So instead, we'll just freehand it. So we start with the Bezier Curves tool using the B shortcut. And we're just going to draw a series of points to represent where her eye is going to go. And then we're just going to smooth everything out. This is kind of a longer way of doing it, but it'll work out. Our usual, let's match up the curves and then change them to smooth points. And you could probably do it with fewer points than I'm doing it with, but I mean, it's all your preference. Sometimes it's better to do more points because then you can get a nicer curve going and you have to fix fewer things later on. It's all up to you. You could probably do it with just 4 points instead of, the 6 I'm using. It's all what's easier for you while you're working on your vectoring. It's going pretty well so far. This is just a little bit off for some reason. This is looking kind of like a flat, squished oval shape. We'll try to eliminate this one perhaps and see if we can make it a little bit rounder. That's the thing. Sometimes you just can't get it quite right, and so you just delete some points and then make it happier. Or delete a lot of points. Let's try this one too. Let's see if that works. If you can delete points and still make the shape look kind of right, that usually means that the show creators were kind of doing the same thing. Well, no, that just isn't going to work. So we'll have to retain that last point. I'll just revert what I was doing there. You can go a little bit too crazy with this and get a little bit off base. All right, well, let's go back to my old handy extension here. We'll select 5 points. Then we'll generate from path, ellipse by 5 points. That looks okay. This one here gets a little bit trickier because it's kind of angled in an oval fashion. So we'll see if we can get this to work. Well, it looks pretty good. It's a little bit small for what we want it for. We could maybe make it just a tad larger. This is the trickier one here because it's kind of a weird flattened oval shape. If I don't get it right, I'm going to have to fiddle with it a lot more, unfortunately. But we'll give it the good old college try. It looks okay. We might have to work on that a little bit more later. Oh well, we'll get the next one here too, while we're at it. One more ellipse, perhaps. That's more like a circle than an ellipse. Maybe not. Maybe we'll try this one again. Because we kind of need this one to be like way out there, really. Which is kind of goofy. But what are you going to do? It's just the way Princess Luna's eyes are always staring at us. Because she knows what you're dreaming all the time. Alright, that's actually going to be a little bit better because I need her iris here to basically cover all of these shapes here too. Now, the weird thing about her eyes in this picture is that she's got kind of her different eye colors there, whereas, in this color guide I've got here, usually they're at the back of the eye, and usually for most ponies, they're at the back of the eye. But this is a show screenshot, and I'm just trying to be show accurate, so we're going to follow what the screenshot's doing. It was probably a mistake on the animator's part, but, whatever, we'll roll with it. We'll just do it anyway. So I'll use my usual trick here of drawing a triangle. We'll just draw a little bit of a bigger triangle. And then we usually like to split that up. So we get back to the points tool here. We try to figure out, well, kind of in the middle here. We'll draw one there, and then we'll duplicate the shape with the Control-D command. We'll delete the outside square. We'll select these two squares. You select one with the box, and then you hold down Shift to select the other. And then we'll make them corner nodes to make that a proper triangle. And we do the same for this one. Oops. Corner node. That pretty much covers what I'm doing here, although, let's see. Well, this is kind of goofy because this particular one actually extends out a little bit farther. So, oh, what the heck, I'll just be silly. We'll make this particular color here extend through the entire corner of the eye is what I'm doing. We'll see what that looks like in a little bit. Now, the other thing to be aware of is this kind of area over here is a different color than her eye white. So we're actually going to need to compensate for that by making another box for it. So I'm going to put some points here on the existing circle just by double clicking on it. Then I'll duplicate this shape again. Usually I use Control-D to duplicate. And I was just going to go see if I could find the usual duplication command. Yep, here it is, Control-D. And now what we can do is delete all the other points on this duplicate shape we've made. And we'll drag it around until it goes through this eyebrow area. Because we don't care, the eyebrow is going to cover whatever we do in this area, so any shapes we draw are going to be hidden as long as they go through this area. Alright, now we've got all the basic shapes. We need to add the color. So the easiest way to do that is just hit F7 when we have our shape selected. Then we'll go over to the color guide and we'll start selecting colors. First of all, we need kind of her eye purple. So let's go look at her eyeshadow color. That's what we need. I'm going to hit the space bar here to swap back to the pointer tool. The space bar in Inkscape actually acts to just swap between the last command you did. So you have to remember that sometimes the last command you did wasn't the pointer. But in a lot of cases it works out. This is going to be white. White is going to be easy to do because white is actually just all F's over here in our fill box. It's going to be the bottom shape. This other shape, we're going to turn the stroke off so we can see it. We're going to leave our stroke on for this outside shape, and I'll show you why in a little bit, just so we don't get confused as to what we're doing. We know that this one here is black, so we're just going to change that. No, I fall into this trap all the time, and it's terribly silly, but I do. I was actually looking at the stroke. I need to change the fill color. I need to turn the fill color on and change that to all zeros. Again, the last two FFs control the transparency layer of 255 here. We usually never want to change that unless you're doing something like, say, transparent goggles. This is actually going to go below. Well, let's make sure that we move these figures to the top by pressing the home key on them. This guy needs to go up, but no, well, they're just being hidden. We know that these are white, so again, what I'm going to do is change the fill to white. All F's, and we're going to turn the stroke paint off. Now it's hidden on top of everything, but once we move this shape up, then we'll see it again, which is cool. We'll do a Control-C, we'll do a Control-Shift-V to copy the styling there. So that works. And it looks really funky because I don't have the iris done yet, but we'll do the iris next. Iris is always more complicated on ponies, of course, because we're always dealing with the gradient. So we need to start with this color. No, not on the stroke paint. I always make that mistake. And the fill color. And then we need to change this to a linear gradient. We're going to edit our linear gradient, and we're going to say that this other stop on the gradient is going to be the other color. Oh, it's just being silly on me again. I'm just going to type this in. Okay. So now we do have our gradient here. We need to swap back to our edit paths by nose button. Oops. Oh no, it's gone silly on me. It's not on the gradient anymore. Got to swap back to our gradient. I have to double check all my gradient colors now because it's being silly. Zooming over here. All right. 29 CAACFF. Oh, that isn't even right. Drat and Tarnation. Oh, no, actually it is right. Never mind. I'm just being silly. We'll go on to the other color. 276 F7C. All right, that looks good. Finally, we've got the gradient going. Now over here, we've got kind of dark to light, but we know in the original image that if we turn this off, we've got kind of lighter over here and then darker over here. So that's what we'll try and go for here. Darker on the other side. So we'll spin our gradient wheel around here. And the farther we stretch that out, the farther we're going to move our darker color from this direction over. And you can just fool around with that until you kind of like what you see. A little bit darker here, perhaps. Fair enough. Okay. Now we've got our two other colors to deal with. We have the upper one, which from here looks like the darker color of the two. This looks like the darker color of the two. So we'll select that. Select this one. Use my spacebar to swap back and forth again there. This is the lighter color of the two. I'm going to turn off my stroke on both of these. And now we have something that looks very odd, which is okay because we'll fix that. We'll turn the stroke off on this one too. Now, as usual, we have all kinds of shapes that are outside our bounding box for where we want things to be. Oops, and I've somehow missed my black. There we go. I've moved that layer down by hitting page down so we can see the other one again. And what we need to do, again, just like I showed on the other eyes, we need to make sure all these shapes that are outside the eye shape go inside the eye shape. Basically, the area bounded by this red line needs to be the area that all of these shapes live within. So, of course, what we're going to use is the set clip function. And to do that, we actually need a duplicate of this shape. Why is that? It's because the shape that we're going to be using will be destroyed when we set the clip, and we don't want the actual eye white to go away. So we're going to duplicate this shape. Duplicate. That actually goes on top now, but all we care about seeing is the line, so we're going to turn that fill off so we can see there's our line. And remember that the shape that you want to be, the clipping shape, you always want it to be on top. So if it's not on top, you want to hit the home button to move it to the top of the layer you're currently working on. Do note that if you do a duplicate of a shape, it automatically goes to the top of whichever layer you're working on, so it kind of saves you some work there. So what we're going to do now is we need to select all of these shapes that we need to clip. Anything that lives outside this path that we're trying to clip to. And then we'll also select that path. And then what we do is we right-click on any of these shapes that we're trying to set the clip for, and we set the clip. That pulls them all nicely inside the shape of our eye. And now the original object, which is still there, we can turn the stroke off for, and everything still looks silly, but that's just because I need to slowly move these down by hitting the page down button so that they fill that part of the eye in. That isn't too bad. You'll note that sometimes this is a little goofy and we can see a little bit of bleed through from one shape to the other. You can spend an awful lot of time trying to fix that sort of thing. And we could do it now. Now, one thing to note is that if you look at each one of these shapes, you'll see it has this green line around it. That was the old shape that we destroyed to set a clip on this particular object. You'll note that if we move this line, that will basically change the bounding box within which this black object, the black pupil object lives. And you'll note that it doesn't affect the other ones. So if we click on one of the other ones, it also has a green line, and you could move this around and suddenly change the shape of just that one. So it's kind of interesting because we destroyed the other shape, but we kind of copied it on top of all these individual ones, and each one's get a copy of that outside bounding shape that you can play around with. So if you've got some issues like this here, where for some reason this green shape seems to be a little bit outside the black shape, you can try to move the bounding box a little to solve that. And if you can line it up properly, like it appears that I may have been able to, oops, not quite. You can cover up any of those mistakes you made. And if you make a small enough movement there, you can't even tell that the shape is bulged out just ever so slightly to cover those other objects underneath. All right, and then we just compare and look at what we had previously. And it's not perfect, but it doesn't look half bad, especially like this area here, which is kind of hard to tell where those triangles come in. Could probably do a little bit better job, and maybe I'll fiddle around with it a little bit later. But that's the general idea. Most of it's just kind of moving these shapes around so that they look right to you. Now we're going to move on and quickly try to get our eyebrows done. So we'll move on to the eyelash layer, which I've already created. Eyelashes is going to live above the eye, so what we're going to do is hide our eye so we can work on our eyelashes. We'll go back to the Bezier Curves tool. We're going to draw several curves here, because this goes like all the way over to here. So when I swap back to the line tool, I'm going to be fooling around with these shapes quite a bit. This is almost like an S shape going on here. Yoop. Alley-oop. I always like to line these up as best I can before I change them to smooth node. Otherwise, things just don't look right. They don't line up properly, and you'll just be frustrated with it. Sometimes I just say, this is getting really bad, and so I just delete all the objects and start over again. If you're ever feeling unhappy about your work, you can always do that. That's always an option. It's not an option you usually like to take because you want to get stuff done the right way the first go around, but sometimes that's what you need to do. I'm going to cancel out with the escape button because I actually want to turn on my snapping over here. So when I click here, and then I can snap to my line over here, and it'll be a little bit easier to match these eyebrows up. Bezier Curves tool, we'll snap there. Ooh, that's not quite right. Oh, my snapping is not working so well. I'll go move this up manually. After I turn the snapping off with the Shift percent, it'll be the Shift 5 key. I find myself turning them on and off quite an awful lot when I'm working. Sometimes it helps a lot, and sometimes it doesn't help at all. Alright, back to bending some more lines. We're going to have to match this up with the outside white sclera of the eye later. But we'll just try to make it look right by itself for now before we worry about matching that up. Trying to get as good as I can here, although realistically, I'm probably going to mess it all up again later in a little bit. Just a little bit. Because now we need to create the whole shape here. So we'll go back to the stroke style over here. Say 5 kind of works. We'll just do Control Shift, oops, Control C, Control Shift V. 5's a little too much for those guys. Maybe we'll try a 3, 4, a 4. Okay, 4 is not too bad. Maybe these guys need to be 3. They are a little bit less chunky. And we should just stop here, right? No. Shit. Okay, now we need to start shaping all of our guys to match all the shapes. So we'll change this to an object. Object to path. No, the other way around. Stroke to path. There we go. We've turned this into an object now with a bunch of points because we need to manually shape this guy. And I always like turning off the visible layer while doing this because you can trace on top of what you're working on a lot easier that way. So we'll delete this guy, we'll delete this guy, we'll make this our corner node. Oop, that's going to be annoying. And then this guy is going to be kind of like that. And that's kind of interesting. Like it doesn't really match up. That does not really match up with the white of her eye there, which is kind of funky. Well, we'll roll with that for now and see how it looks. If it looks too funky later, we can always fiddle with it. I'm not too happy with where these points are located right now. And in fact, I'm just going to delete a few of them to try and make this a smoother line overall. The fewer points you've got, sometimes the better it works out for you. You just have to experiment with it. And sometimes you need more points because otherwise you can't possibly make the curves look right. And sometimes your points aren't quite at the right inflection point, so you got to move them around too. That's my problem here, so I'm just kind of adjusting, fiddling with it. Like this guy, I think. This is going to be our point over here too. I don't think I did a very good job originally tracing this particular object out. But them's the breaks. It's the way it goes. Nothing's perfect, unfortunately. We're looking for good enough. We're not looking for perfection. We're looking for looks right artistically, not does it trace and match up perfectly with our original model. If you always held yourself to that standard, you'd never finish anything. I certainly wouldn't finish anything because I'm too much a perfectionist as it is. Sometimes what you want to do to see what you're doing is just turn off the original layer and then look at it yourself and say, ooh, that looks kind of funky. That looks actually quite a bit better. I can't possibly make that curve proper if I do that, unfortunately. Oops. That's not too bad of a shape. We'll turn our layer back on again. I mean, it won't match up perfectly with the model, but it'll look pretty good on her. And that's all we care about. I'm going to go back to my other shortcut, Control-Alt-C, and we're going to work on our other eyelashes. Now, you can actually delete either of these when you're making a point, but I found that if you delete the one below the one you're trying to make the point, so if you're going to curve up to that point, it's a lot easier to draw it. A lot easier to draw all the lines you're trying to draw. That's just my experience anyway. So let's try that again with this one. Control-Alt-C. We'll hide the layer. So if you're trying to make a point that curves up to here and back, then the point you're trying to make the point should remain, and you delete the other one. And then you just kind of drag this back and drag this around. And then it looks pretty good your first try. And you don't have to spend forever trying to make it nice. Again, we're trying to make it curve that direction. This one feels like it needs to be a little wider there at the base. Not too shabby. Next one. And the last one. That one's a little too fat and bulky there. All right, we got our eyelashes. So let's turn the eye back on again. Ba-doop. And let's turn it back off again. Ba-doop, 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 ba-doop. Interesting. So we've noticed here that the eye itself is actually a little bit larger over here in this corner than what we can see in the original drawing. This is one of those situations where you have artistic license. Do we follow what the original drawing did, or do we not? I'll probably have to sit down and think about that one for a while, so I'm not going to do anything right away. Instead, what I'm going to do real quick before I finish the video out is we're going to match these eyebrows up with our eyeball here, and then we'll call it a day. My easiest way of doing this is to turn our snapping back on, Shift 5. Oops, oops. Yeah. Sometimes that makes it more difficult than it needs to be. Because once we get this matched up, then we've got a slight curve on the eye, so you can fiddle with this. But as long as you get that close enough, it's near as makes no difference, then everything is pretty much fine. And you got to kind of extrapolate out where this is going to go. And just let the black slowly cover just a little bit of the eye. Because when you're zoomed out, people won't be able to tell that you didn't get it quite perfect. Just good enough so that your eye can't tell the difference. Oh no, this one here looks like it got curved a little bit on me. There we go, that's better. This lower one doesn't want to be like curved in like this, which is what it was before I fixed it. All right, this last one here we need to curve out. And now we just look at it and say to ourselves, is that close to what Luna's eyelashes look like? It is pretty close. Well, let's now ask ourselves, this looks a little bit blacker, perhaps. Maybe we could get away with a slightly larger eyebrow. Eyelash, I should say. Well, we can get away with a slightly larger eyelash, but I don't know if we can get away with a large enough one to cover that up. Or maybe we can. Maybe we'll do something like this, perhaps. We'll just pretend. There's no harm in pretending. Except now my shape doesn't look right, which is frustrating, but we'll try this again. This was the original spot. We'll just I'll select both nodes and I'll just move it down a little bit, and then move this down a little bit, so we still got kind of that same uplift shape, except, haha, we've managed to avoid having that eyeshadow hangover, which was looking a little goofy. Maybe we can make this a little bit larger, though. It's a delicate balance between making things look right and making them look silly. But now we can turn off the first layer and see that it looks pretty good. All right. Thanks for watching, every pony, and catch me next time when I continue to work on Princess Luna.